"Are you heading out for the holidays, Professor?" The question came from a colleague seated next to Professor Arthur Holloway at the faculty dinner at Sterling University. "Yes, I'm off tomorrow," replied Professor Holloway. "I've taken up golf, and I'm going to Seabrook on the East Coast for a week or so to work on my swing." Professor Holloway was a young academic who approached himself and all his endeavors with an intense seriousness that left little room for humor. "Oh, Holloway," another man chimed in, "there are some ruins of an old Templar preceptory at Seabrook. Could you take a look?" "I'd be curious to know if it's worth a visit." "Certainly," said the professor. "I'd be happy to make some notes for you. I imagine there won't be much remaining above ground. The site is quite close to the shore, about half a mile north of the Mariner's Rest Inn." "I'm actually staying at the Mariner's Rest," Holloway said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. "They could only offer me a room with 2 beds. I intend to get some academic work done and required a large room with a desk, but I must admit, the idea of a second, empty bed is rather unsettling." "2 beds? How dreadful for you, Holloway," said a man named Peterson. "Perhaps I should come down and keep you company, use the spare one myself." Holloway managed a small, polite laugh. "I'm afraid you'd find it exceedingly dull, Peterson. You don't play golf, do you?" "A dreadfully boring game," Peterson said, not bothering with politeness. "But if you don't want me there, just say so. The truth, as you always lecture us, never causes harm." Professor Holloway was known for 2 things: his unwavering politeness and his rigid adherence to telling the truth. Peterson often found amusement in posing questions that put these 2 principles in conflict. Holloway searched for an answer that was both truthful and courteous. "Well, Peterson, perhaps my ability to concentrate on my work would be somewhat compromised by your presence." Peterson let out a loud laugh. "Well said, Holloway. Don't you worry, I'll let you have your peace. I can be useful, though. I could keep the ghosts away." He grinned at the others around the table as Professor Holloway's face flushed a deep crimson. "My apologies, Holloway," Peterson added quickly. "I forgot you dislike such careless talk about ghosts." "That is entirely correct," said Holloway, his voice rising slightly. "I cannot entertain the notion of ghosts. It stands in direct opposition to everything I believe. I hold, as you know, very firm convictions on this matter." "Oh yes, we are well aware," said Peterson. "Well, perhaps we can revisit the topic in Seabrook." From this exchange, it should be clear that Holloway was indeed a man of profound seriousness, sadly incapable of appreciating the lighter side of life, yet also a man of great courage and sincerity in his beliefs. The next day, Holloway arrived at the Mariner's Rest in Seabrook and was shown to his room, the one with the 2 beds we've heard about. He unpacked his belongings, arranging his books and papers with meticulous precision on the large desk by the window. The desk was, in fact, flanked by windows on 3 sides. The main central window offered a direct view out to the sea. The one on the right looked south towards the village of Seabrook, and the left one faced north along the coastline and the low cliffs behind it. Between the inn and the water, there was only a patch of rough, wind-swept grass before the beach began. Over the centuries, the sea had crept steadily closer. Now it was no more than 50 yards away. Most of the guests at the inn were there for the golf. One of them was a Colonel Miller, a retired soldier with a booming voice and equally loud opinions. Professor Holloway, who was as brave as he was honest, spent his first day playing a round of golf with Colonel Miller, attempting to improve his game. He was perhaps not entirely successful, because by the end of the afternoon, the Colonel's face had taken on an alarming shade of red, and even his mustache seemed to bristle with anger. Holloway decided it would be wiser to walk back to the inn alone. He chose a path along the beach, intending to locate the Templar ruins. He found them easily enough by tripping over one of the ancient stones. As he dusted himself off, he noticed the ground around him was pockmarked with shallow depressions and remnants of old stone walls, now covered in turf. The Templars favored round churches, Holloway recalled, and even after so many years, there were enough grass-covered stones to trace the circular outline of the original structure. For a while, Holloway walked about, observing, measuring, and jotting notes in his pocketbook. A large, flat stone lay in the center of the circle, and he saw that the grass had been scraped away from one of its corners. He knelt and, using his pocket knife, dug away more of the turf to expose the stone beneath. As he worked, a clump of soil fell inward, revealing a cavity beneath the stone. He tried to strike a match to see inside, but the wind was too fierce. Instead, he reached his hand into the opening and felt around with his knife. The sides, top, and bottom of the space were smooth and uniform. It was clearly a man-made recess within the stone. As he withdrew the knife, he heard a distinct metallic clink. There was something inside. He reached his hand back in, and his fingers closed around a thin piece of metal. Naturally curious, he pulled it out. It was a metal tube, about 4 inches long, clearly man-made and ancient. By now, the light was fading fast, so he slipped the metal object into his pocket and began the walk back to the inn. In the evening twilight, the place felt wild and desolate. A cold north wind pushed at his back. Far in the distance, he could see the welcoming lights of the village, but here, there was only the vast, empty beach, punctuated by the black wooden groins that marched down to the shadowy, whispering sea. He moved from the shingle higher up the beach down to the firmer sand, which made for easier walking, though it meant he had to clamber over a groin every 100 yards or so. When he glanced back to gauge his progress, he saw he might have a companion for his journey home. A dark figure, some distance behind him, seemed to be running to catch up. Yet, oddly, it never appeared to get any closer. It couldn't be anyone I know, Holloway reasoned, so he didn't wait. Nevertheless, he began to think a companion might be rather welcome on this cold, dark stretch of coast. He suddenly remembered the fanciful stories he had read in his less rational youth, tales of strange encounters in lonely places. What would I do now, he mused, if I looked back and saw a figure with wings and a tail? Would I flee or would I stand my ground? Fortunately, the person behind me looks nothing like that and seems to remain just as far away as when I first saw him. I shall get my dinner before he does. And oh, heavens, it's nearly dinner time now. I must hurry. At dinner, the professor found Colonel Miller in a much calmer mood than he had been on the golf course. Later, the two men played cards. As Holloway's skill at cards far exceeded his skill at golf, the colonel became quite amiable, and they agreed to play another round of golf the following day. When Holloway returned to his room, he found the small metal pipe where he had left it on his desk. Examining it closely, he realized it was a whistle. He attempted to blow it, but it was clogged with dirt. He took out his knife and carefully cleaned the dirt out onto a sheet of paper, which he then emptied out the window. As he stood at the open window, he was startled to see someone standing on the grass in front of the inn, despite it being nearly midnight. He quickly shut the window and brought the whistle back to the lamp to inspect it further. After cleaning off the grime, he discovered letters deeply etched into its side. QUISESTISDQUIVENIT. Now that's Latin, he murmured to himself. I believe it means, who is this who is coming? Well, the most direct way to find out is surely to whistle for him. He raised the whistle to his lips and blew. He stopped abruptly, surprised and intrigued by the sound he had produced. It was a soft, low note, yet it seemed to carry a great distance. It conjured a vivid image in his mind, a wide, dark expanse at night, a fresh wind blowing, and in the center of it all, a solitary, lonely figure. But just then, a real gust of wind rattled his window, and the image vanished. The wind was so sudden and violent it made him look up, just in time to see the white form of a seabird dive past the window. Fascinated by the whistle's unique sound, he blew it again, this time with more force. No picture formed in his mind, but a sudden, extraordinarily violent blast of wind threw his window open with a crash. Both his candles were extinguished, and the wind seemed intent on tearing the room apart. For 20 seconds, Holloway struggled to force the window closed again, feeling as if he were pushing against an intruder fighting to get in. Then, as suddenly as it began, the wind died down for a moment, and the window slammed shut, the latch clicking into place. Holloway relit the candles and checked for damage. There was none, not even a cracked pane of glass. But the commotion had woken the colonel in the room above. Holloway could hear him pacing and muttering to himself. The wind continued to howl for a long time, beating against the inn and wailing like a creature in agony. Lying in bed listening, Holloway considered that a less rational person might imagine all sorts of dreadful things. In fact, after 15 minutes, he conceded that even a rational person would prefer not to listen to such a sound. He noticed that one of his neighbors was also having a restless night. He could distinctly hear someone nearby tossing and turning in bed over and over. Sometimes, as we try to fall asleep, our minds conjure images so disturbing that we are forced to open our eyes to banish them. This is what now befell the professor. Every time he closed his eyes, the same scene played out. There was a long beach, with groins running down to a dark sea under an overcast sky. He recognized it as the beach he had walked along earlier. Then, in the distance, a figure appeared, running along the sand, scrambling desperately over the groins, constantly looking back over his shoulder. Holloway could not see the man's face, but he knew with certainty that the man was terrified. He was also nearing exhaustion. Each groin was a greater struggle than the last. Will he make it over this next one? Holloway thought. It looks higher than the others. Yes, half climbing, half throwing himself, the man cleared it and collapsed on the other side, unable to rise. The vision had not yet revealed the source of the man's fear, but now a distant shape materialized, moving with incredible speed. It wore a long, flowing garment, and there was something so unnatural about its movement that Holloway felt a profound reluctance to see it any closer. It paused, raised its arms, then bent low towards the sand. Then it scurried, still bent over, down to the water's edge and back again. Now it straightened up and advanced along the beach at a frightening pace. At last, it reached the groin where the exhausted man lay hidden. Again, it ran down to the sea and back, then lifted its arms and rushed towards the groin. It was always at this precise moment that Holloway's courage failed him, and he had to force his eyes open. Finally, he resolved to light his candle, take out a book, and read for a while. The sound of the match striking and the sudden flare of light seemed to startle something near his bed. A spider, probably, which scurried across the floor. The first match went out, but a second one burned steady. Holloway lit the candle and opened his book. When he eventually felt drowsy enough to sleep, he forgot, for the first time in his tidy, sensible life, to blow out the candle. The next morning, it had burned down completely to a pool of wax. He was in his room after breakfast when the maid who cleaned the rooms entered, carrying some blankets. "Would you like any extra blankets on your bed, sir?" she asked. "Ah, yes, thank you," said Holloway. "I would like one, I believe. It seems to be getting colder." "Which bed shall I put it on, sir?" the girl inquired. "What? Why, the one I occupied last night," naturally replied Holloway. "Oh, yes, sir. But we thought you'd slept in both of them, sir. We had to make them both this morning." "Really? How peculiar," said Holloway. "I didn't touch the other bed, except to place my suitcase on it when I first arrived. But you thought someone had actually slept in it." "Oh, yes, sir. The sheets and blankets were all tossed about. I thought perhaps you'd had a bad dream, sir." "Oh, dear," said Holloway. "Well, I do apologize if I created extra work for you. Actually, I'm expecting a colleague of mine from the university to visit for a few days and use the other bed. That will be all right, I trust." "Oh, yes, sir," said the girl. "It's no bother at all, I'm sure. Thank you, sir." And she left the room. That day, Holloway made a concerted effort to improve his golf game, with some success. The colonel became even friendlier and quite chatty. "That was an extraordinary wind we had last night," he remarked as they played. "In my part of the country, they'd say someone had been whistling for it." "Do they truly believe in that sort of thing where you come from?" asked Holloway. "They believe in it all over," the colonel replied. "And in my experience, there's usually a grain of truth in what country folk say." There was a pause in their conversation as they continued the game. Then Holloway said, "I feel I must tell you, Colonel, that I hold very strong opinions on these matters. In fact, I have no belief whatsoever in anything supernatural." "What?" cried the colonel. "Do you mean to tell me you don't believe in ghosts or anything of that sort?" "In nothing of that kind whatsoever," replied Holloway. "There is a rational explanation for everything, you see. In fact," he went on, "I blew a whistle myself last night, and the wind did seem to arrive in response to my call. But that, of course, was mere coincidence." The colonel stopped and stared at him. "Whistling, were you?" he said. "What kind of whistle was it?" "Your turn to play, sir." Holloway hit the ball and then recounted to the colonel the story of finding the ancient whistle in the Templar ruins. "Well, sir, I'd be extremely cautious about using a thing like that," said the colonel. "Who can say what those Templars used it for? A dangerous bunch of people, they were." He then launched into his opinions on the church, both ancient and modern, and the two men had a thoroughly enjoyable debate. The morning passed so pleasantly that they continued their game into the afternoon, walking back to the Mariner's Rest in the evening light. As they rounded the corner of the inn, the colonel was nearly bowled over by a small boy who ran full tilt into him and then clung to him, sobbing. At first, the colonel was annoyed, but he quickly saw the boy was so terrified he couldn't speak. "What's the matter? What did you see? Who frightened you?" the two men asked together. "Oh, sir, I saw it wave at me from the window," cried the boy, "and I don't like it." "What window?" said the colonel gruffly. "Explain yourself, boy." "That one, the front window of the inn, sir. Upstairs." After several more questions, they pieced together that the boy had been playing on the grass in front of the inn with his friends. When the others had gone home for their supper, he had looked up at the large front window and had seen something waving at him. It was a figure of some sort, dressed in white. The boy couldn't make out its face, but it had waved. There was something horrible about it, he said, something not human at all. "It was just someone trying to scare you," said the colonel. "Next time, like a brave young man, you throw a stone at it. Well, perhaps not that, but you should tell the people at the inn about it. Now, here's a coin for you, and you'd best run home for your supper." The two men walked around to the front of the inn and looked up. There was only one window that matched the boy's description. "That's very strange," said Holloway. "I distinctly remember locking my door when I left this morning, and the key is still here in my pocket." They went upstairs, confirmed the door was still locked, unlocked it, and went inside. "Well, everything seems to be in perfect order," said Holloway, looking around. "Except for your bed," said the colonel. "That's not my bed," said Holloway, "but it certainly does look very disheveled." The sheets and blankets were in a chaotic tangle all over the second bed. Holloway thought for a moment. "Ah," he said, "I must have disturbed it when I was unpacking. Perhaps the maid came in to make the bed, the boy saw her at the window, and then she was called away before she could finish." "Well, let's call the girl and ask her," said the colonel. When the maid arrived, she insisted that she had made the bed that morning, and that no one had entered the room since the professor had departed. Mr. Henderson, the innkeeper, had the only other key. Mr. Henderson then came up and swore that he had not been in the room himself, nor had he given the key to anyone. Holloway checked his belongings carefully. Nothing was missing, and his books and papers were exactly as he had left them. The maid remade the bed, and the two men went downstairs for their dinner. That evening, Colonel Miller was unusually quiet and pensive during dinner and cards. As they were heading up to their rooms, he said to Holloway, "You know where my room is if you should need me during the night." "Oh, thank you, Colonel, but I don't anticipate needing to call on you," replied Holloway. "Oh, I have that whistle I told you about. Would you care to see it?" The colonel turned the whistle over and over in his hands, examining it closely. "What are you planning to do with it?" he asked. "I shall show it to my colleagues at the university when I return, and likely donate it to the museum if they deem it of any value." "If it were mine," said the colonel, "I'd throw it into the sea this very instant. But of course, you and I do not see eye to eye on these things. Good night," and he went off to his room. There were no curtains on the windows in the professor's room. The previous night it had not mattered, but tonight a bright moon shone in a cloudless sky. Holloway was concerned the moonlight would wake him, so he improvised a screen using a blanket held up by his walking stick and his umbrella, which would block the moonlight from his bed. Soon, he was settled comfortably, reading for a while before blowing out his candle and falling asleep. An hour or so later, he was violently awakened by a loud crash. In a daze, he realized his makeshift curtain had collapsed, and brilliant moonlight was flooding his bed. Should he get up and fix it, or could he manage to get back to sleep? He lay in bed for several minutes, debating what to do. All at once, he turned over, his eyes wide open, listening intently. There had been a movement in the other bed. Was it a rat? The sound came again, something shifting in the blankets, making the bed frame creak. No rat could make a sound like that. Suddenly, his heart almost stopped as a figure sat up in the empty bed. Holloway leaped from his own bed and scrambled towards the window to grab his walking stick. As he did, the thing in the other bed slid silently to the floor and stood with its arms outstretched, blocking the path between Holloway and the door. Holloway stared at the creature in abject terror. He could not reach the door without touching it, and the very thought of that contact filled him with a profound physical sickness. Now it began to move, bending low and feeling its way forward with arms that were concealed within its flowing, white garment. Holloway realized with a surge of horror that it could not see. It turned away from him, and in doing so, brushed against the bed he had just vacated. It bent its head low and felt all over the bed with a searching motion that made Holloway tremble uncontrollably with fear. Realizing the bed was empty, the creature moved forward into the patch of bright moonlight shining through the window. For the first time, Holloway saw it clearly. The only detail he could recall later was a sickeningly horrible face of crumpled linen. The expression on that face he could not, or would not ever describe, but it was enough to drive him to the brink of madness. He had no time to study it for long. With frightening speed, the creature moved around the room, searching, feeling, and a corner of its flowing garment brushed across Holloway's face. He screamed in pure horror. At once, it lunged at him, forcing him back towards the window. The next moment, Holloway was halfway out of the window, leaning backwards, screaming again and again at the top of his lungs, and the cloth face was pushed pressingly close to his own. In that final, desperate second, the colonel kicked the door open. He was just in time to witness the terrifying tableau at the window. When he reached them, only one figure remained. Holloway collapsed forward into the room in a dead faint, and before him on the floor lay nothing more than a crumpled bedsheet. The colonel asked no questions. He kept everyone out of the room, helped the shaken Holloway back into his own bed, and wrapping a blanket around his own shoulders, spent the remainder of the night sitting vigil in the other bed. The next morning, Mr. Peterson arrived from the university, and to his astonishment was greeted with immense warmth by the professor. The three men talked for a long time, discussing what should be done. The colonel, recalling a similar incident from his time in India, theorized that the entity, having no physical body of its own, had been forced to construct one from the bed linen. At the conclusion of their discussion, the colonel left the inn. He walked to the cliffs, and holding a small, ancient piece of metal between his thumb and forefinger, he threw it into the sea as far as his strong arm could send it. Later that day, He burned the crumpled sheet in a field behind the Mariner's Rest. As you might imagine, Professor Holloway's opinions on certain matters are now considerably less certain than they used to be. He is also a far more nervous person than he was. Even a coat hanging on the back of a door can give him a start, and the sight of a scarecrow in a distant field, late on a winter afternoon, has been the cause of more than one sleepless night.